And I also wanted to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And I'm very excited to introduce you to Jill Escher, our special guest tonight. Jill has many roles in the autism world. She currently serves as the president of the National Council on Severe Autism and is the past president of the Autism Society of San Francisco Bay Area. She is also the founder of the Escher Fund for Autism, which funds innovative research on potential causes, as well as autism-related programs. She is actively involved in promoting research and is a member of the Governing Council of the Environmental Mutagenesis and Genomics Society. She is also an owner of Clarendon Properties, which provides low-income housing to adults with autism and other developmental disabilities. A former lawyer, she and her husband are the parents of two children, ages 23 and 26, with idiopathic nonverbal autism.
16, but close to 26. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
So tonight, the format is going to be question and answer. And to start off with, I'll be asking the questions and Jill will be answering as no one other than Jill could possibly do. And then we'll have some time for your questions. And let's go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here with you.
Fantastic. So, I mean, we all hear a lot about autism and, you know, the spectrum. Can you just give us a little bit of a overview of what's meant by that and where those with severe autism might fit?
Sure. So autism, as we all know, is a very heterogeneous condition. It's very diverse, from very high functioning. For example, there's some researchers, professors, teachers, lawyers, doctors, with autism. And then there are kids like mine who are nonverbal and have very significant functional and cognitive impairments. These people who we sometimes call severe autism or profound autism or classic autism or Kanner autism. People use different, or level 3 autism. People use different terms to apply to this population, but from a qualitative point of view, they tend to have cognitive disability, functional disability. They tend to have need for 24/7 care or access to 24/7 care. They can't earn a living. They can't really care for themselves in any ordinary sense of that term. So that's really who we represent at National Council on Severe Autism. And often that population have complex behaviors in addition to the functional disabilities. So that could be, aggression. It could be self-injury. It could be property destruction, elopement. They could have comorbid medical conditions like seizures. And many other things. So definitely autism is not, as we know, one thing.
Thanks. How large is the population that's autism or autistic, and how has it grown over time?
Yeah, well, how autism has grown over time question is, like, in my mind, the most important question. We have to understand how absolutely enormous this growth has been over the past 30 to 40 years, and what the implications of this growth are. There's been abundant denialism about this. People saying, oh, it's better awareness. Oh, it's just us, shifting categories, what they call diagnostic shift. It's just a broadening of the diagnosis. And really none of that is true. Those are, there's overwhelming data that autism has increased astronomically. And if we talk just about, let's see, our county, we're both in Santa Clara County right now in California. Santa Clara County in 1990 in our regional center, which was SARC, had about 150 cases of autism in 1990. Today, there are more than 4,700. All right. From 157 to 4,700, that's a 32-fold increase. And we know the regional centers don't serve the broad spectrum. They only serve those that have very substantial functional impairments and are considered developmentally disabled. It is absolutely preposterous to blame the increase in autism on non-etiologic or diagnostic factors rather than actual changes in the population. In the state of California, we've seen similar trends. Back in the 80s, there were about 3,000 cases of autism in the whole state. Now we're past 150,000, 3,000 to 150,000. Do the math. That's a 50-fold increase over more than 35 years. So we've seen this trend really all over the industrialized world, and so far it's completely unexplained, except for a couple things having to do with prenatal factors, but that only explains a small amount.
Yeah, fantastic. My own observation is that many of these government agencies like to look backwards instead of forwards, and unfortunately, it's hard to talk about the future because it's open to a lot of debate. You play a lot of roles, and I read at least one in the area of housing. Can you speak a little bit about the roles that you play, particularly in this area of housing, which is so important to so many of us?
Yeah, so important. Well, when it comes to housing, I kind of play a lot of roles. First of all, I'm a consumer. I have a son, Johnny, who's 23, and he has severe autism. He no longer lives with us here at home. He lives in a house that he rents from us because we have a business. We're property investors. So I'm a consumer. I'm also a provider in that I have a small, it's kind of a mom and pop property investment company. And we've been able to, over the years, provide more than 15 adults with autism and other developmental disabilities with housing. I think we currently house 13 such tenants, most of them in Santa Cruz, California. And we're able to do that, and hopefully we'll get to this in our discussion, because these tenants have vouchers that allow them to pay rent. Otherwise, they would never be able to live in the community. All these people have no income whatsoever, except for SSI, which we know is only about maybe $900 a month. So, which is a joke right here in Silicon Valley. Like, to even think about, $900 a month is something you could possibly live on. And I'm also an advocate for housing, right? So I've been an advocate for housing when I was president of Autism Society San Francisco Bay Area. I engaged with many municipalities, many counties, many housing authorities, trying to drum up more and more housing opportunities for people in our area. And now, as president of the National Council on Severe Autism, we're really looking at sort of national policy. We're beginning to look at to see if it's at all possible to make a change on a broader level than just, county by county, or even state by state. And so it's a big task, because, as I said, this population has grown astronomically. And right now, about 90% of people with autism in the DDS system live in the family home. Most of them live with their parents, right? And we parents, nothing against you and me, Dana, but we're getting old, we're aging, all of us, and we are temporary, right? We're this temporary Band-Aid over, this horrible wound. And we're going to go away, and all of these, young adults and children with autism are going to need supported housing for the rest of their lives. We aren't really talking about how huge this population and the intensity of their needs. So it's really bad. We're facing, to say it's an uphill battle is the understatement of the century. I mean, this is a huge crisis no one wants to talk about.
So as a parent today, outside of the family home, which, as you said, is a ticking time bomb, right? As we get older, what are the options? what's that landscape look like?
Right. Okay. Well, every state is a little different. But I can, kind of go through the hierarchy, if you will. I mean, most people obviously live at home with family, usually parents, sometimes siblings, sometimes grandparents, sometimes, um, aides that come in who are paid, usually through a Medicaid program. So living in the family home in some fashion until the family's no longer there is obviously the most common form of autism housing, even for adults, not just for children. Um, the second one is, what I think your son is doing and what my son is doing, where they rent or sometimes maybe own their own house. And that could be a condominium, it could be a townhouse, it could be a single family home. It could be a share in a limited liability company, with other families. But in that case, you are your own proprietor of your own home as the disabled person, and help is brought in almost always unlicensed through an agency like a supported living agency or an independent living agency or something like a self-determination program where you have a kind of a budget to spend every month, or you can use in-home support services through Medicaid, or you can have even something else like my son gets services through the regional center through something called personal aid. He doesn't have supported living services. So there's Medicaid dollars and other dollars sort of, they kind of trickle down in different ways with different labels. And Medicaid dollars, federal money matched by state funds to a certain extent, are then used by the consumers in this fashion. The third one would be the group homes. I think maybe, or what you would call residential facilities. You might know a little bit about that, Dana.
A tad.
A tad. Have you had any experience running these licensed facilities? So when I say group home or licensed residential facilities, I'm talking about a licensed entity in California under community care. Every state is a little different. And that's, could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 adults, sometimes children, living together under one roof with support. And, one agency runs everything, even if they're renting the property. It's not like supported living where it's really kind of fragmented. It's a little more all inclusive, a little more wraparound. The fourth one, actually, I referred to this before, but I would separate it out. The family LLC. That's when a bunch of families get together and buy a property together. That's a lot more cost effective for people, and it also provides a community that a lot of families and individuals really strive for. And we see that kind of growing in popularity. We see families coming together. It's a complicated endeavor to do one of these projects, but we have a few of them now in California, and I've heard of others in other states. And again, a lot cheaper. Like here by the way, if you're not here in Silicon Valley, buying your own home is going to cost you 1.5 to 2.5 million dollars. Most families can't do that. So, going together as a group is often a more viable solution. There's another thing, that we have here in California, and I think they have in other states, adult foster care, where basically the adult is placed with a family. Sometimes that works for people who are higher functioning. It's really not a solution for those with severe behaviors. Shared living models, they have different names. Like, have you heard of things like Camp Hill, where there's like a farm community, and people kind of with disabilities and without disabilities, all live together kind of seamlessly in this kind of, very creative solution. And it's very, very mission driven. There are also things called intermediate care facilities for the developmentally disabled, which are also funded by Medicaid. And those tend to be, and they're public ICFs and they're private ICFs. Those tend to serve adults who are much more severely disabled, right, than those in the other forms of housing. So I kind of gave a lecture there, but you asked. about the different forms of housing. And there are even more than that. I think that those are kind of the top ones on the top of my mind.
Great overview. How about the overlay, which is a parent of a a son or daughter with severe autism? What kind of challenges does that present?
You mean, okay, so the parent is at home as the caregiver, right? For
Yes.
the adult with severe autism. Well, it's again, it depends on the state, the kind of problems we encounter. But here's the story that we hear more often than not goes like this. You know, the child with severe behaviors is somewhat manageable until puberty and early adulthood. And it's usually a boy, sometimes it's a female, but usually it's a male. They become very, very strong and they overwhelm the capacity of the parents to keep them safe, to keep the siblings safe, right? To keep themselves safe. This is what happened with us. I'll be very frank with our son. When he turned 20, it was impossible for us to keep him at home. It was constant trauma at home, constant destruction and aggression that we were completely unable to control. And this is a very, very common story. So what happens is the parent will usually go to the Medicaid authority. Like here, it's the regional centers in California. In other states, it's, you know, there's other, you know, types of agencies desperately seeking help. Quite often, even here in California, the regional centers will say, sorry, we have nothing to offer you. And then the parents really look desperately for help in the home, you know, through, you know, agency help, aides, assistant who can be at the home and help care for the child. You know, if it's a single mom, she might need a large man, quite literally, like to live in the home with her. And usually the parents need to fight tooth and nail. Sometimes they end up just taking the adult or, you know, the older child to the emergency room, looking for crisis help. And usually the ER has no idea what to do, and there's no place to discharge them to. Now, there are exceptions to that, but by and large, you know, we're living in a time of immense crisis without adequate facility placements for these very complicated adults. You know, these are adults who need psychiatric care, they need medical care, they need behavioral care. You know, they need often very specialized amenities in their residential facility, you know, so that to keep everybody safe. They often need outdoor, you know, access to the outdoors. My son wants to be outdoors 95% of the time. He would never be able to live like in a small home or an apartment or a condo, never. So, you know, finding and the biggest thing is staff, right? Finding the staff, right, who are able to come in and, you know, help the adult either in the family home or outside the family home. We, you know, more than anybody, we're experiencing an immense staffing crisis that has been exacerbated by COVID. And, you know, this is a problem both from supply and demand. The demand keeps growing, right? And the supply, you know, is either flat or dwindling. So you get it from both sides.
Well, thanks. That was quite thorough. Are there other resources that someone can turn to besides the regional center?
Well, you know, in California, if you have severe autism and you need housing, the regional center will usually tell you, we are not your housing provider, right?
Right.
They will say, we can provide you services, which comes through these Medicaid trickle down, you know, funding streams, but we are not a housing provider. Now, that said, sometimes the regional center is the housing provider. Sometimes they do end up paying the rent. But they don't want to be in that business. It's expensive for them, and they'd rather use what are called generic resources in the community. So for the brick and mortar part of the housing equation, For somebody, with profound disabilities who has no real income, right, except for Social Security, what are the options? Option number one, I think, really should be the housing authorities. So every county or region, I think it depends on where you are, has a housing authority that gets money from the federal government through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, to fund housing programs for low income and disabled people in their catchment area. And this mechanism has worked astonishingly badly for the IDD community, shockingly badly. We are really in the dark. I think HUD is completely in the dark ages when it comes to the needs of this community. HUD has a couple programs. They have something called 811, and that provides grants to developers, basically, to create disability-oriented housing. But there's been this crazy cap that HUD 811 funds could only fund projects with maximum 25% of people with disabilities, which is, in my mind, not only outright discrimination, but outright contrary to the intent of these programs and these laws. Beyond HUD 811, there are what's called, I'm sure almost all of the listeners have heard of Section 8, also called portable housing vouchers. Those in our area are very hard to get. And what the portable vouchers would do is they would give the disabled person basically like the vast majority of their rent, their monthly rent.
Yeah, a rent subsidy of sorts.
It's a rent subsidy, and it's a very valuable rent subsidy, but very hard to get, even for the most extremely disabled adult. There are long wait lists. A lot of people want the HUD vouchers, and there are a lot of interest groups that are already in line. Some of them are just people who are poor, right? They have no disability at all, but they're just poor. And then there are homeless, and then there are veterans, and then there are the mentally ill, and there are all these other constituencies, right, that want HUD vouchers. And IDD, for example, we're always at the bottom of the list. Like, we get no priority. The only time I've seen us get priority, again, in our area, is for the individuals who are exiting institutions. And as we know, in California, there are no institutions left. There's virtually no adults with autism left in an institution in California. So on paper, it looks like there's a priority program, but in reality, there's really not. So many of my tenants, because I do have this little mom and pop housing business. Some of them had exited institutions when those institutions were around. Others got Section 8 vouchers through a waitlist system. But it's very hard. My tenants are incredibly lucky, and they're very rare. We need to make this not rare. We need to make these vouchers available to every adult with a severe cognitive disability who can't earn a living and can't care for themselves. That should be national policy, and we're nowhere close to that. Now, there are other resources for housing. There's something called set-asides. What happens is, in municipalities under state law and sometimes other laws, new developments, let's say you're building a 100-unit apartment complex in Sunnyvale, right? You have to set aside 5%, let's say, of your units, let's say 5 units for adults with developmental disabilities. And that would be a permanent low rate, let's say $500 a month instead of $2,500 a month for a nice apartment. The set-aside program works for some people. It's okay. It's a terrible thing for adults with severe autism and severe IDD, for most of them, a terrible system, because that arrangement, those settings are not appropriate for them. Also, you have to, sometimes the income eligibility is far above what our population has. You have to be like low income, but our kids aren't low income. Our kids are like extra low income, right? And they don't even qualify for these programs. So, there's some really deep flaws in how we are providing housing. Now, if you're in a group home or something like that, you'll basically write over your SSI check, right, to the group home, and that'll pay part of the rent. You know better than me what other sources might be. There's also private fundraising and special needs trusts and ABLE accounts, right? Private funding. But a lot of families don't have that kind of access to those sort of those options. They don't have trust fund babies.
I totally agree with you, Jill. I mean, you get a program that reasonably works well, like Section 8, or I forget what you called them, 9/11.
Section 811.
Yeah, 8/11. Probably should have called it 9/11. But those work relatively well, but there doesn't seem to be any interest at either the state or federal level to expand them. And it's like we've got to solve this housing problem all over again from scratch.
That is kind of how it feels. I don't see real solutions on the table. I mean, there's some other grant funds, I shouldn't say those aren't the only ones, like their tax credits. There are other funds that go into special needs housing. Right. I do want to say that I'm not giving the full lecture here, but I really don't see anything at the state or federal level where people are number one, acknowledging this humongous crisis, or number two, putting any type of solution on the table. We're more interested in pretending this isn't happening and that it isn't a need.
Yeah. What about, I mean, we heard a little bit from them last week, but what about Housing Choices as a resource for someone, looking for that housing?
Yeah. Oh, I work with them a lot. So Housing Choices, for those of you who aren't in Santa Clara County or San Mateo County, is a really cool nonprofit. It's based here in San Jose. And its mission is to assist adults with developmental disabilities. I think most of whom are regional center clients, maybe not all of them, but vast majority are regional center clients, in locating housing. And that could include like the set asides, right, that I just talked about, like, those 5 apartments in the new, groovy new 100 unit, complex in Mountain View or whatever. It could be through a voucher program like Section 8. It could be using regional center funds, which I have seen happen, even though regional center will deny it. And probably possibly other things as well. I don't know how much they help with the licensed residential facilities like yours, Dana. I do know they've worked helping people in co-op situations, people kind of group living together. And I think that they're an excellent resource. They also have done a lot to advocate for more housing in our area. And I don't know if something like Housing Choices is available, in many other regions. I don't know.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think they have filled a very important void, here locally. Mm-hmm. And, they're kind of under thanked for the role they've had with developers to get them to step up and commit to set aside these units within their developments. And
yeah, I mean, their former director, Jan Stokely, I mean, she must have appeared at like a gajillion hearings, right, with counties and with cities and towns around the Bay Area, pushing them to do the right thing and commit to more special needs housing.
Yes, I think that pretty much wraps up the formal questions. I've got a feeling that there's a lot of questions that have come up that.
Well, one thing I remember that you guys did want to ask about. It might not be on your list, but I remember it from the notes from before. Was the question like, is it harder for people with severe autism to find housing? Like, why is it harder for them? right? I mean, it's hard enough to have an intellectual disability, but then to have severe autism on top of it. And I want to say something that I think is really super important for everyone to understand, that most of the Medicaid dollars go into what's called HCBS, not into the ICFs, not into the intermediate care facilities, but into what's called home and community-based services. And those home and community-based service providers, by and large, I'm sure there are exceptions here and there, by and large, can pick and choose who they want to serve, right? A group home who's the recipient of HCBS funds from Medicaid can say, well, we have a choice between Johnny or Sammy. And Johnny wrecks the furniture, and Johnny hits other people, and Johnny bites staff. So we don't want Johnny, right? We want Sammy, who's nice and quiet and will sit and watch TV with us and will help us make dinner and smiles all the time, right? This is a phenomenon that has the effect of excluding from services a huge portion of the severely affected population. People don't understand that just because there's Medicaid money coming down the pike, that doesn't mean it's going to reach the consumers who need it most. The consumers who need it most often are excluded the most because of the fact that providers can pick and choose. So listen, I know how hard it is to live with a strong young man with severe autism. I'm not here to tell anyone it's easy. It's really hard. But what we need in Medicaid is a provision that specifically addresses this population and ensures that they have access to the care we need. And we do not have that now.
Right. Well, I you and I have talked about this quite a bit. Residential care providers are governed by levels, and levels come with staff, and they come with rates, and unfortunately, most providers get a right of first refusal. They do not have any control over who's placed in their homes, but they can, in fact, maybe decline someone who they think might not fit.
Yes, they can.
And I know that's tough. And I mean, we've seen individuals who needed a higher level of care, right. And I kind of come back to, and it's very difficult but possible to do here in the state of California, is to create, new programs or new residential care levels that come with higher rates and higher staffing. And bingo, exactly right. Right.
That's exactly right. I think it's obviously needed. And by the way, I don't want to say like providers actually should have the ability, right, to turn down people. I mean, because if you have a certain type of program, you're targeting a certain type of constituency. Well, fine. My only point is, from a bigger level, from the umbrella level, the umbrella has to include options, right, for those who are excluded from the other ones. That's all.
Yeah, and it's a gaping hole, and both in day programs as well as in residential programs. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of people go with supported living, because they don't like it, but there's no limit to the level of support, right? And so residential care, I mean, our homes typically 5 residents, 2 staff. I mean, I've seen supported living situations where there's 1 person, 2 staff.
I've seen 3 to 1. I've seen 3 staff, on one. Yeah. But supported living agencies can also turn down cases.
Yes.
And they do. My son was turned down by every single supported living agency, so that's why he has no SLS. And I said, hey, can you get on the wait list? Because they're actually doing what's called like an enhanced behavioral SLS program now, which they're moving towards in our region. I'm like, can you get on the wait list for that? Maybe. So you
Yeah.
can see that there's some people who are trying to problem solve, but it's tiny baby steps.
Well, and the reason some of these changes are needed is that, you know, frankly, Jill, you're very resourceful. And, but it's for all the people who don't have those resources
That's
and,
my point.
you know,
Yes.
yeah, they need those options and they need to be not that difficult,
Mhm.
right? And I'd really like to see, you know, those kind of programs that they created with the closure of institutions to be available in the community for these needs. And these needs, like for those with severe autism, are just getting, you know, more. Um,
Absolutely. I agree 100%. You know, it comes down to the political will, and how do you
yeah,
generate the political will to do that? Well, that is really hard when it's something that's so complex and so expensive, and it's something people would much prefer denying exists. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
I'm being completely honest when I say that I think denial about the autism increase is it's a willful ignorance. It's a willful denial, because it's so much easier to not look at the problem. Because once you look at the
right,
problem,
right.
you know, you're looking at billions of dollars, you know, a year. It's And no politician wants to do that. They'd rather build bridges and roads and schools and colleges and, you know, police forces and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you just look at the budget, we're of course very happy that there is a rate study implementation, and now it's been pulled up. But um, you know, just since I've been paying attention to state budgets, they've gone from 100 billion to 300 billion, and it's over 100 billion just going to education.
Yeah, that's eating.
Eh,
Yeah, and by the way, an increasing portion of that every year to special ed. Actually, our special ed population, because of the autism surge,
Yeah,
has absolutely exploded, and that's part of it. But you know, they're you know, we can talk about teachers unions.
yeah, yeah.
We're not going to
Don't,
go there.
don't get me started. Well, thank you for reminding us that we hadn't really dug into that quite as much as we had anticipated. So let's transition to questions from the audience. Back to you, Brittany.
Yes, yeah, we certainly do have some really great questions from the audience. I'm going to go ahead and try to combine two here. The first one is asking how families, you know, how can they find resources about forming an LLC for housing? And the other is along a similar vein, asking how an individual can work with the state to open a home.
Okay, well, Dana Hooper would be the better option for part two of that question. I guess I'll start with the LLC part of that question. You know, what we've seen with these family groups that have come together and formed LLCs is that they've been very willing, by and large, to share information about how they started. And some of them, like Anna Wang, who was
Yeah,
absolutely famous in our area and is a total hero out here. Anna Wang was one of the founders of something called the Peralta Apartments that pioneered this model. It's in Fremont. And I think it's a 16 unit apartment complex. And, you know, she inspired other people to do something similar. There's one now in Santa Cruz called Coastal Families. And I think that's about 16, maybe 20 LLC partners as well, LLC members. And, you know, I cannot tell you how complex and difficult it is to do something like that at that scale. I'm not going to
yes,
pretend like, oh, you just have this LLC agreement and you put it on, Facebook, and all of a sudden people show up. No, I mean, it's like they call it, it's like marriage. It's like, instead of marriage between like two people, it's like marriage with like 16 families. And so,
yeah, I mean, Joe and I have heard, horror stories about, I mean, you know how hard it is, to get agreement between two people. Well, try 16
16.
and then do it over time.
Yeah. That said, I mean, with a lot of sweat equity, these people are finding, a good measure of success. It's not like this is futile. But no, these people tend to be very happy to share their operating agreements and some background about how they came together. So if somebody wants to email me, and my email will come at the end of this presentation, they can.
Yeah, same here. The second part of that question is good luck, getting the state to do anything directly with housing. And it was once said that no governor had ever used the H word in any speech in the state of California. They never once
mentioned housing.
That's changed a little bit, but it still remains true in DDS and in SARC. And the only circumstances when there's been housing funded is in conjunction with a new service, a new service category, enhanced behavioral homes, or some other. It's not just housing. It's a program, and housing is part of it. But I've tried to get funding for housing from public sector, and it's very difficult, and it comes with a lot of conditions. So that's one of the reasons why LSA has turned to private donors and foundation and organizations that are willing to support this population with grants. But please reach out to me, and I'll be glad to share what I've learned.
Yeah, I should say, with respect to group homes, there are really two types. Dana, correct me if I'm wrong. One is the kind of private provider. The other is a nonprofit provider.
Yes.
Right. And often the private provider of the group home, it could be just a family. It could be just, a single person. It's an investment for them, really. It's they use the money they earn providing services to pay down their mortgage. Then when they paid off their mortgage, they own this property, and sometimes they just go out of business, right? They'll just say, bye, I'm done. See ya.
They retire.
Right?
They get older, just like everybody else, and think about, their exit strategy.
And the nonprofit group homes are more stable. Like, Dana LSA is a nonprofit. They're more stable. They won't go out of business just because Dana decides to retire. And they do have access often to other forms of financing. Sometimes, but as Dana said, it's very hard. And then he's had to increasingly rely on donors. Lord knows those SSI checks ain't going to cut it in terms of paying that mortgage.
Right. Yeah. And so you both talked a lot about the different housing options earlier, but someone wants to know, if these group homes aren't appropriate for their child, what is the next option? And specifically, how can they find caregivers to handle aggression?
Okay. It is very hard to find a group home willing to take a child or an adult who has, aggression, self-injury, property destruction. In California, the regional centers through the Department of Developmental Services have started something called enhanced behavioral homes. There aren't very many of them. They're kind of like a pilot project. They're enormously expensive, from what I hear. Some people, I've heard it's a lifesaver. For some people, it's been a nightmare. They've encountered massive neighbor problems. Neighbors don't want these enhanced behavioral homes in their neighborhoods. And, this, they call it a NIMBY problem, but sometimes it's not just NIMBY. Sometimes there really is, issues with noise or issues with, other, they're usually on. I believe I'm a big fan of, homes in the community, believe me. But sometimes there are problems with homes that are legit. And so, beyond the enhanced behavioral homes, how do you get staff? Well, some supported living agencies have staff capable of dealing with these issues. But as I said, those are very rare. They can pick and choose, and they tend not to choose them. The staff, the wages for like in-home support services, the wages for SLS services, the wages for, this personal aid service, which my son has some of, those tend to be pretty low. They're close to minimum wage or a couple dollars above minimum wage. And so people, who have the ability to, who have the smarts, right, and the physical ability to deal with severe behaviors, they often are able to get much higher paying jobs. So it's very hard to attract staff. And we need to have much more recognition of this level of need. I remember a couple of years ago, I was talking to somebody who works in DDS, the Department of Developmental Services, about the closure of the institutions. And he said he had worked for decades in the system. And he said, Jill, you have to understand, we close the institutions not to be do-gooders. We close the institutions because we were paying those people psych tech union wages of $35 an hour, and we didn't want to pay it anymore. We wanted to pay minimum wage in the community. That was the reason. That was the main purpose behind closing the institutions. And I said, well, yeah, but then you're not going to get the same level of care that you would have had like with the trained psych tech. And he's like, yeah, well, we all knew that would happen, but they were willing to, the system was willing to sacrifice quality. And so we're seeing that now, right? We're seeing what everybody knew would be the consequence of paying people minimum wage, for these complex cases.
There is some hope on the horizon. DDS is looking at how DSPs are trained and different level rate structure. And, the problem is if everything's compressed to minimum wage or just above it, who's going to spend the time to get trained? There's no credentials, slowest common denominator. When you start to have a system that recognizes a DSP1, a DSP2, a DSP3, and that those differences are meaningful,
right?
And then you could start to have, the equivalent of a psych tech, that's built into the rate structure for this person because they need it. But frankly, if you're hiring somebody at home, the answer is you have to throw a lot more money at it. Right, because
and I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't talk about this in public, but what routinely happens is, the families end up subsidizing, putting some dust on the top. Otherwise, they would never be able to retain staff. It would be impossible.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we have time for just maybe one or two more questions. But someone, Joe, wants to know if Clarendon Properties is reproducible and how they could start something similar in a different part of the state.
Wow, that's a really good question. Okay, so again, the model that my husband and I used to start our business was basically pure investment. Right? We decided we weren't going to be a nonprofit. We weren't going to go for grants. We weren't going to go for any kind of fancy financing, just pure investment. But this is what I always tell people. If you want to do what we did, you have to be willing to be a bad business person. That's the secret sauce. If you go into it with a conventional developer mindset, a conventional landlord mindset, you will fail because you're not going to make the kind of money, right, that your friends are making, right, doing market rate housing, right? So I went into it with a mindset like I was willing to be a bad business person. I was willing leave a lot of money on the table to do this work, because it was a business, but it was sort of a semi-philanthropic business for me. If you're willing to make, from at the start, at least, maybe 1%, return on investment, you can succeed. If you want to go into it thinking I'm going to make 5, 6, 7%, you will fail. So especially in this area, I mean, God, real estate is outrageously expensive. I don't even think people can make 1% now if they're doing below market rate. But if you're getting market rate like through Section 8, again, very hard to get. You could probably do it. Although financing has become harder, right, with the recent interest rates, and I won't get into that whole math. But really, I just want to stress that it is possible to reproduce what we do. The 2 secrets: bad business person, and get tenants who have HUD subsidies, who have housing authority subsidies.
Yeah. Well, some of you have heard me talk about how LSA has added all these homes over the years. And my thing when we get to add a home is I say to the board, we're only going to lose $3,000 a month on this house. Isn't that a great deal?
Yeah.
So you have to, if you're really going to grow, and things are changing with the rates, but you have to be willing to come up with the money some other place, because it isn't a business to be in if you're talking about profit or even necessarily break even, although we have been able to break even in total. It's just that new homes are impossible to break even on to start with.
Yeah, and it will be different in other regions. Dana and I operate in one of the most expensive areas in the whole country. Right. So if you're watching and you're in another region, another state, it might be a lot easier. But
this is one of the issues that was fixed in the rate study, but it's still true with SSI. SSI doesn't distinguish with whether you're in the back country of Utah.
Exactly.
Or you're in Santa Clara County, you get the same amount.
Yeah, right? It's nuts.
But the cost of living is not the same. And historically, rates for services in California were the same in Eureka as they are in Santa Clara County. Yeah. And unfortunately, the cost of living is not the same. And, wages are higher, et cetera, et cetera. So, being able to tie some of these to the place a little bit better makes it make more sense. Unless you want, and maybe there's some people who want everybody with a disability to live in a low cost place, which is just so utterly wrong. They should be able to live in the community that they want to live in. So I guess we have one more question, Brittany, and then we better wrap. Jill and I can go on forever on forever.
We are almost out of time, but we can certainly do one last question. A parent would like to know how they can advocate for their children.
Yeah. Well, with advocacy, there's strength in numbers, and at National Council on Severe Autism, ncsautism.org, we're actually starting something called the National Grassroots Network. And you can easily sign up on our website. It only takes a minute to do so. So that's one option. Another option is, for example, Autism Society San Francisco Bay Area. If you really wanted to be a good advocate, you see about joining a committee, even joining the board of something like Autism Society or wherever you are. What is the group, right, that's doing that kind of work? And barring that, just talking to your elected representatives, about your problems, letting them know. But yeah, I think working within an organization is often more useful.
I agree completely. It's not easy. And then when there is an important issue, typically, organizations like the ones Jill mentioned, will put it out there. And then it's those times when you can jump on the issue with your elected officials.
Great. Well, unfortunately, we could not get to all the questions this evening, but there were a lot of great questions asked, and that was an amazing discussion, Jill and Dana. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just wanted to put one more thing out there, and for Jill, I guess, what can people do to help the National Council on Severe Autism?
Oh gosh. Well, go to our website. Oh, there it is. There's our website. Go to our website. I think learn about us. Sign up for our newsletter. Subscribe to our podcast. Sign up for our National Grassroots Network. It's all there on the website. If you can donate, of course, we're always happy to accept, donations. If you can serve on a committee or you have a certain amount of expertise, we're always looking for people with expertise in certain areas. And you can contact me for more information, jill.escher@gmail.com.
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, so the NCSA website was shared in the chat along with Jill's email. Thank you all so much again for all of your questions and for joining us this evening for IDD Topics and Trends with Jill Escher. As always, please keep in touch. You can get in contact with us via our website, and also you can email us and stay in touch with us on social media as well. We have a wonderful chat coming up with Chip Huggins on August 2nd, and we'll be joined by Scott Mendel and Lawrence Fung later this summer. Really excited about those chats as well. And there will be a link in the chat that you can register for our next session with Chip. And thank you all so much for attending. We will see you next time.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Dana.
Thanks, Jill, for joining us. You were great.
Thank you. Thank you. So good to talk to you about such an important topic. All right, signing off.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone.